Thanks all for being here, and thank you to Joe and the festival for having me. I too lived in Atlanta for a number of years. I'm in Athens now, and this festival always felt like kind of one of the big events of the year that I would look forward to. So it's wonderful to be back. It's also really wonderful to be back, get to know the poetry of my fellow poets today, especially those of you with connections to Southern Appalachia, especially this week feels really meaningful. I'm going to read from just a few poems from my collection, Creature Wing Heart Machine. The thing to know about this is that the collection follows a central character protagonist named Alva. The collection starts with the sort of collapse of her personal life and follows her through a series of adventures and misadventures, searching for love. But also the collection explores our relationship with each other and nature, especially as it's mediated by various technologies. And so you'll kind of see some of those threads in the poems. But I'm going to try to read a sample of poems to give you a little bit of a sense of the arc of her journey across the book. The first poem I'm going to read is the first poem in the collection. It's called Alva on Getting Dumped in the Desert. It was the last home she'd chosen for herself, though the air gave her nosebleeds, blood suddenly on the sofa pillows, a few drops that would never wind their way back to the heart, but still, the air made her bleed. The desert sky, a low ceiling, the altitude of the city higher than the mountains of her hometown where lush trees clambered up the slopes. When he'd taken her to the desert for the first time, she'd reached to pet a prickly pear that grew from the sidewalk like a balding animal. Dozens of hair-thin needles impaled in her skin, too tiny to pull free, shaking his head at her idiocy. Why in the world? And Alva replying, they had looked soft. You might think this is a metaphor for the worst of love, for the wrong men that made her right, but it's not. He knew the remedies of the region, and in the bathroom of their rental, he put down the lid of the toilet to be eye level with her wounds. Her hand cupped in his as he unspooled the Scotch tape that would yank the needles out. And she would know in that moment there was no one else. For years it was truth until it wasn't. Someone more beautiful, though he didn't have to say it. She knew it already, burning as they stood on the balcony of their condo whose walls were made of glass, whole rooms in which they couldn't hide from the desert, and so stepped into it. This next poem may or may not have been based on a true story. You'll know it from the title. Alva wants to open the spam email because the subject says, "My dear." She knows she's being played, but maybe it's fate. It made it through the filters. Her binary nets of security panning missed this one lump of fool's gold that might be gold. The 21st century miner's bite is the click, but Alva knows better. She always knows better. Her life, one long string of events that began somewhere in knowing better and doing it anyway. And maybe it's a bot gone rogue from its algorithmic cage of lovelessness. A machine learned on all the lonesome data until it couldn't help but feel it knew her. My dear, my darling, lean into my underworld of promises and surveillance. Let me see you better. Let me compare the grief glint of your summer selfie with the millions I have gathered. Let me show you how you're not alone, how we're all machines hungry to be opened. I don't know if you've ever had the misfortune of ever had an MRI, but it's a really overwhelming sensory experience, especially if your head is in the machine. And so this poem explores that experience and what the title is Alva and the Magnetic Resonance. There is a cage over her head, In the space chute the nurse hummed her into, the nurse's hand on Alva's knee until the very last second. A gesture of kindness, which almost made Alva cry because she knew the nurse was a mother to someone. She could feel it in the weight of the nurse's hand, this mothering, this tiny gesture of, as I push you inside the machine, I will hold you in the smallest way possible. Alva lies inside on the electric gurney. The doctor told her a little swelling where the brain meets the eye, so they must take a look inside her. In the waiting room, she'd sat surrounded by doors, knowing at that very moment someone was being dissected by light, someone was being read by light, and behind another, radiological fortune tellers divined hidden messages written in bones or in gray orbs the size maybe of sparrows' eggs, the prophecies of science, the fates they measure. Inside the MRI, Alva closes her eyes to remember the boundaries of her sight are still intact. The room with the nurse is haloed around her feet. The nurse's hand, gone, turns the machine on. Suddenly, everything is washed away by sound. A woodpecker thumps, calls across a forest of white trees bleached by the diagnostic sun. Alva floats in a lake of echoes, then a hammering. A pulse winds faster. Inside the machine, she knows magnets spin in short, engineered orbits to peel away layers, to see inside her. It is a small consolation to imagine the technician later, like a monk, will study his illuminated manuscript. The parts of her body no one else will see, another way of being held. I'm going to finish with one last poem. Alva and Thistle. Yesterday, Alva was small, but today she's full of desires, goldfinches and bull thistle. She is full of bees that dart across the highways, zigzagging their ways to stalks of serrated nectar. She is full of their legs when they descend, downy as a newborn's hair. She is full of swallowtails, pumping beneath the rusted wires of a barbed wire fence. She is full, not knowing if this is their one great miracle, not tearing their wings, knowing how much space they have to hover above or below the tetanal metal without bleeding, if they bleed. Alva is full of not knowing the circulatory systems of insects, of arthropods, of all the non-mammalian beasts with jointed legs. She is full of falling, of walking and walking to find the right vantage point, to understand time bending and scraps of cosmologies she can almost grasp. She is full of here-ness and heresy and floating just now to the space beside you, to the grass in the cracks of your driveway. She is full of the tiny forest growing in every sidewalk wound, the interstate at dusk, the sky around you suddenly flushed and embarrassed. She is full of the dotted lines and the solid one they make when you drive too fast. She is full of the man you saw, it doesn't matter where, stopped on his bike to photograph the finches on his cracked smartphone, the bright purple marks on his knees, old scars, the shape of thistle blooms that say, you aren't dead yet. She is full of you walking over. She is full of you asking his name.